U.S. missile crews never expected haunted secrets to surround. Nevada's desert silos. U.S. missile crews never expected haunted secrets to surround. Nevada's desert silos. They built their lives around schedules, checks, and silence. They lived inside concrete and radio static, under a sky so wide it swallowed sound. They thought the only things in those deserts were wind and secrets written on metal. They were wrong at night. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. Radios whispered words that had never been spoken. Cameras captured faces at the edge of light, where maps showed only sagebrush. One crewman counted 11 unexplained power cycles in a single week. Another found a folder, soaked and unsigned, that referenced a test nobody admits existed. These are not stories told in mess halls to impress. These are the small, stubborn facts that refuse to vanish. Tonight, we follow those facts. We go where men trained to control the world's deadliest arsenal found themselves unprepared. We hear the logs. We read the reports. We listen to the men who woke up to something that didn't fit the manual. A single unanswered question will follow us into the first chapter. What was hiding among the silos, and why did it refuse to stay buried? The silence beneath the sand, the Nevada desert, was never meant to be quiet. Wind tore across the dunes, rattling dry sage, carrying the hum of faraway machines. Yet for the men stationed beneath it, in the missile control silos buried miles from civilization, the world above might as well have ceased to exist. Down there, it was only steel, fluorescent light, and routine. But in the fall of 1967, that routine began to fracture. Lieutenant James Halpern was the first to report it. His shift logs from October 3rd were typical at first. System checks, comm drills, status normal. Then, at 02:13 hours, a handwritten note appears in the margin. Heard movement in Corridor 3. Verified doors sealed. No explanation. Halpern underlined those last two words twice. Command chalked it up to stress, fatigue, isolation, the usual answers. But then it started happening to others. A week later, Sergeant Decker woke to alarms blaring in the lower deck. When he reached the panel, the readings were fine. The power flickered, then stabilized. But in that moment of half-light, he swore he saw a figure standing by the blast door, gray, motionless, watching him. The cameras recorded nothing. The logs showed no entry. By November, the entire crew was on edge. Men started refusing to sleep near the access tunnels. Some began hearing voices through the comm headsets, soft murmurs in frequencies far below human range. They described it as humming, almost like a chant. The official record buried all of this under equipment interference. But off the record, a rumor began to crawl through the base. They called it the Watcher, a name whispered only when the desert winds howled loud enough to cover it. The desert had its own history long before the silos were built. Native tribes warned that certain valleys near Groom Lake were sacred ground, places where the earth spoke back. Old ranchers told stories of strange lights flickering beneath the sand long before the Air Force came. But in 1967, such stories were background noise to men trained for nuclear protocol, until the background started fighting back. One night, the crew of Silo 19 lost power entirely. Backup generators kicked in, but only partially. For 12 full minutes, the control room sat in red emergency glow. In that silence, the intercom system crackled. A voice came through, female, calm, and utterly unfamiliar. She said only one thing: "You shouldn't have opened it." When power returned, the system log showed no transmission. Every circuit had been offline. The crew tried to laugh it off, but no one slept that night. By dawn, the desert outside was blanketed in a strange fog, something rare for Nevada. Sensors recorded it as an atmospheric anomaly, but the smell was metallic, like burnt copper and rain that never fell. Halpern wrote again in his journal. Whatever it is, it knows we're here. Weeks later, an inspection team arrived from the Department of Energy. Officially, they were there to upgrade security systems. Unofficially, they confiscated several reels of magnetic tape, including one recorded the night of the power failure. The men were told never to speak of it again, but stories have a way of surviving orders. One of the inspectors, a man named Dr. Avery Cross, later wrote a letter to a colleague at Los Alamos. It was never sent, but it was found decades later in his archived belongings. In it, he described what he'd heard on that confiscated tape. There was a woman's voice, yes, but it wasn't broadcast, it was embedded, like it was inside the static itself. And beneath her words, something else. A rhythmic pulse, too structured to be random noise, almost like breathing. After that visit, the Air Force decommissioned several nearby silos without public explanation, but Silo 19 remained active. Halpern's team stayed on rotation until early 1968, when an accident, at least that's what the reports called it, forced their removal. According to the file, a missile hatch malfunctioned during maintenance, resulting in the loss of 2 crew members. The hatch had weighed 40 tons, and yet it was found open without mechanical failure. There were no fingerprints, no tool marks, no witnesses. In his final debrief, Halpern reportedly told his commanding officer, "The desert opened it." Those words were enough to mark him as unstable. He was discharged, transferred to a medical facility in Utah, and his records classified. But the story didn't end there. In 1972, new crews arrived to reactivate portions of the network during Cold War tensions. The Air Force wanted faster response coverage, and Nevada's silos were strategic. But the fresh recruits soon learned why the locals avoided the perimeter at night. Equipment shut down without reason. Radio towers lost calibration. And sometimes, late at night, the sand itself seemed to vibrate. Technicians described it as a hum that moved through the ground, circling the site like something alive. One of them, an engineer named Curtis Vale, left an audio log, later leaked in the 1990s, where he whispered, "They told us to ignore the hum, but it's not the equipment. It's coming from below." For decades, these accounts were dismissed as the byproduct of paranoia and secrecy. But then, in 2004, satellite imagery picked up an anomaly near the old silo sites. A perfect ring, 100 meters across, etched into the desert floor overnight. It wasn't erosion. It wasn't wind. And inside that ring, heat signatures continued to pulse for 72 hours before vanishing completely. Whatever was buried there had either awakened or finally gone silent. Today, only a handful of declassified documents hint at what truly happened beneath Nevada's wastelands. The rest remains buried, under sand, under lies, under the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. But there's one thing the surviving crewmen agree on. The silos were never abandoned because they were obsolete. They were abandoned because something else claimed them. And somewhere out there, amid the shifting dunes and the hollowed silos, those who still listen say they can hear the hum again. Only now. It sounds closer. As the night settles over the desert and the air turns still, we move deeper into the archives, into Chapter 2, where the documents that were never meant to be read will reveal what the government tried to erase. But the real question lingers like dust in the dark. What did the U.S. missile crews disturb? And did it ever leave? The voice in the static. The recording began with nothing but silence. Then a faint crackle, a pulse. Like breath caught inside an old machine. The reel spun under the dim light of an underground archive, and Dr. Anna Cross leaned closer, her headphones trembling with each faint vibration. It was 1997, 30 years after her father, Dr. Avery Cross, had vanished somewhere near the Nevada test range. The government had called it an accident. But what she was hearing now didn't sound like an accident at all. The voice came through after 11 seconds. A whisper. Female, calm, distant. "You shouldn't have opened it." The same phrase her father had written in the margin of his final field note. Then came the sound that changed everything, a low rhythmic hum, almost melodic, deep beneath the static. It wasn't interference. It was something alive. She pulled off the headphones, her pulse racing. The archive lights flickered once as if responding. She'd spent 5 years tracking the recordings tied to Silo 19, each one more distorted than the last. But this one felt different. It wasn't echoing from equipment. It was echoing back. Outside, the Nevada night was still. The ruins of Silo 19 lay under layers of dust and sand, surrounded by rusting fences and half-collapsed towers. To anyone passing by, it looked forgotten. But sensors still blinked faintly near the old hatch. Someone, or something, was still drawing power. That same night, a maintenance drone operated by a private contractor captured heat signatures where no one was supposed to be. 2, moving slowly near the silo's entrance. When the footage was reviewed the next morning, the shapes were gone. But for 3 frames, something strange appeared. What looked like a figure standing beside them, its outline sharp against the sand, then dissolving like vapor. Dr. Cross wasn't supposed to have access to that footage, but a former technician sent it anonymously to her encrypted inbox with a single message. It started humming again. She drove out there 2 days later, defying every warning she'd ever received. The air was dry, metallic, humming faintly in her ears as she approached the site. The closer she got, the more her instruments malfunctioned, compass spinning, radio hissing, digital recorder flickering between frequencies. And beneath it all, she could hear it. A vibration through the ground, faint but steady, like a machine buried deep beneath the desert. She reached the main hatch. It was welded shut decades ago, layers of sand fused into its edges. Yet when she laid her hand on the cold steel, it vibrated slightly, rhythmic, alive. She pressed her ear closer, and the hum stopped. Dead silence. Then, faintly through the metal. You shouldn't have opened it. She stumbled back, heart hammering. There was no power. No radio, no explanation. But she knew she wasn't alone. She turned on her flashlight. For a split second, a shadow moved near the collapsed tower, human-sized, gone when she blinked. Back in her car, she started recording notes, voice shaking. It's real. It's active again. The energy field is... She froze. A faint voice interrupted her radio feed. It wasn't on any channel. It was her father's voice. Anna, leave this place. She dropped the mic. The voice was gone. When she returned to her motel that night, her computer was already on. Files she'd never opened were on the screen. Classified communications from 1968, labeled Operation Echo Deep. Each document mentioned seismic readings, unregistered frequencies, and something buried beneath the command chamber. The last page bore her father's signature, and a hand-drawn symbol that matched the one burned into the desert sand ring decades later. Her father hadn't vanished. He'd gone back underground. The next morning, she contacted an old Air Force engineer, Curtis Vale, the same man who once whispered that the hum came from below. Now in his late 70s, Vale agreed to meet her in a diner 2 towns away. His hands shook as he lifted his coffee. You shouldn't have gone there, he said quietly. They sealed it for a reason. Anna leaned closer. What did they find? Vale looked past her toward the window, as if afraid the desert itself could hear him. We thought it was an old cavern under the silo. During maintenance, the ground gave way. But when we sent cameras down, there were structures. Not rock, metal. Like tunnels. But not made by us. He paused, swallowing hard. They sent Dr. Cross down there. Your father. He was the only one who volunteered. Anna felt her stomach tighten. He never came back, did he? Vale shook his head. Not the way he left. The day after the hum started. The lights failed. Men quit. They said they saw him walking near the surface at night, even after command declared him missing. She sat in silence, trying to absorb his words. Then what's under there? She asked. He hesitated, eyes trembling. We were told it was an old test chamber from the Manhattan years. But the readings, it was older. Not man-made. And the voice? That voice wasn't on the comm lines. It was inside the signal. Anna stared at him. Inside? He nodded. Like the signal was alive. Like it wanted to be heard. That night, Anna drove back to the site one last time. She set up her instruments, each calibrated to detect subsonic vibrations. The reading spiked immediately. The hum was stronger now, pulsing in waves. Through her recorder came the faint pattern of breathing, slow, steady, human. Then the ground shifted. Dust poured from the cracks near the hatch. The hum deepened, turning into a low roar that made her bones ache. She stumbled backward, the flashlight flickering wildly. Something was moving beneath the sand. For a moment, she saw the hatch shudder. Then a seam split down its center, revealing a faint red glow. The hum turned into a voice. Not her father's, not the woman's. Something deeper. Ancient. You brought it back. Her flashlight died. The glow from the hatch pulsed once, twice, and stopped. When silence returned, the desert felt heavier, as if holding its breath. Anna backed away, heart racing, until she reached her car. She started the engine and drove without looking back. Behind her, the desert swallowed the light again, as if nothing had ever stirred. Hours later, back at her motel, she played the recording from her microphone. The hum was gone, but buried in the static, faint and chilling, was the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching the mic. Then her father's voice, clearer than before. It's not a voice, Anna, it's a door. The screen flickered, showing corrupted frames of video she hadn't recorded. frames showing the inside of a metal tunnel, lined with strange markings glowing faintly blue. Then, one last frame, a shadowed figure turning toward the camera, the image cut to black, and somewhere beneath the Nevada sand, the hum began again, only this time, it was spreading. The hollow sky 3 days passed before anyone noticed the pattern. Radio towers across the desert began picking up low-frequency signals, pulses spaced evenly apart, repeating every 6 hours. To most operators, it was nothing more than interference. But to Dr. Anna Cross, those pulses weren't random. They matched the rhythm she'd recorded at the silo. The hum was no longer contained underground. It was moving through the airwaves. She spent her nights at the motel, curtains drawn tight, her room cluttered with old tape reels and new digital recorders. Each night the signal grew clearer, the intervals shorter. And buried within the static, she began to hear faint words, distorted and layered like 100 voices whispering through sand. Her father's name, then her own. Sleep became impossible. When she closed her eyes, she heard the breathing, the slow, deep sound that had filled the control chamber decades ago. The same sound that had driven Lieutenant Halpern to scribble warnings into his logs before he disappeared. Anna wasn't just hearing history. It was repeating itself, reaching for her through time. By dawn on the 4th day, she made a decision. If the government wouldn't reveal what was under the desert, she would. She drove west to the restricted boundary near Groom Lake. Beyond the fence, a convoy of vehicles sat under camouflage netting, new, modern, and very active. They weren't relics of the Cold War. Someone was still guarding the silos. As she parked behind a ridge, her radio crackled to life without warning. A man's voice came through, calm, professional. "Dr. Cross, you need to leave the area." Her heart froze. She hadn't transmitted anything. The voice continued. "You've been listening to the wrong frequency. You're waking it up." Static swallowed the rest. Anna stared at the horizon, at the faint shimmer of heat rising from the sand. For a moment, she thought she saw movement near the old silo towers. 3 figures in dark suits walking the perimeter, each holding devices that blinked faint green. They weren't soldiers. Their movements were too slow, too deliberate, like they were measuring something invisible. She waited until dusk before moving closer. The wind picked up, carrying with it that metallic taste again, the same scent she'd smelled near the hatch. Her skin tingled. Beneath her boots, the sand felt warm. When she reached the crest of the dune, she saw it. A fissure had opened near the old silo entrance. Thin lines of light glowed from within, pulsing in rhythm with the hum. The 3 men she'd seen earlier were gone, their vehicles abandoned. One of their scanners lay half buried in the sand, still active, its screen flashing a single word in red. Resonance. Anna felt her pulse racing. She crouched, aimed her camera toward the fissure, and began recording. The light inside shifted, blue, then green, then white. It wasn't steady. It moved like liquid, like something alive and curious. Then, for just a moment, she heard her father's voice again. "Anna, don't look into it." The ground vibrated beneath her. The fissure widened slightly, releasing a sound that didn't belong to any machine or living thing. It was deep and mournful, like a cry buried in stone. She fell back, dropping the camera. The light dimmed, then vanished completely. Silence. When she gathered the courage to retrieve the scanner, the word had changed. Now it read, "Transfer." That night, back in her room, her recordings refused to play. Every file was corrupted except one, a single clip 42 seconds long. In it, a man's voice whispered through layers of static. "Echo Deep is complete. The containment failed. It's using the frequencies now." She replayed the clip a dozen times. On the final playback, something new appeared, a faint sound behind the voice. Not static this time, breathing. It wasn't coming from the recording. It was coming from the walls. Anna turned off every device, but the hum continued, faint but distinct. The lights in the room flickered. Her reflection in the mirror behind her wavered, half a second out of sync. When she moved, it didn't follow immediately. Then slowly it smiled. The power cut out. In the blackness, her phone lit up. A message flashed across the screen. "You shouldn't have opened it." By morning, she was gone. The motel manager found the room empty, the window cracked open, sand scattered across the floor. Only her tape recorder remained on the bed, still running. The last few seconds captured a single voice, male, calm, familiar. We told her to stop listening. Weeks later, the same low-frequency signal began interrupting broadcasts across Nevada, leaking into emergency channels and civilian radio. The hum now reached as far as Arizona. Researchers called it an atmospheric resonance anomaly, but those who worked near the old silos whispered a different explanation. They said the ground had gone hollow. That beneath the desert where the missiles once slept, something else had awakened, something that learned how to speak through machines. And sometimes, when the desert wind falls completely still, the radios in old trucks pick up a voice. A woman's voice, soft and distant, asking a single question, "Can you hear me?" The signal always ends the same way, with the faint sound of breathing, followed by a pulse. And if you play that recording backward, the hum forms words, a warning. It's not buried anymore. Somewhere, under miles of shifting sand, the hatch of Silo 19 remains sealed, but satellite images show faint light leaking through the cracks again. The hum is rising, and this time it isn't waiting for anyone to open the door. The resonance field, the hum had become a language. At least that's what the recording suggested. Engineers studying the interference called it acoustic resonance mapping, patterns forming in the static, almost like speech, but built from frequencies too low for the human ear to process. The more they tried to decode it, the more erratic their instruments became. By the spring of 1998, the U.S. military quietly reopened the perimeter around Silo 19 under the guise of environmental cleanup. No press, no officials, just men in unmarked uniforms carrying sound-dampening rigs and thermal scanners. They were told they were studying underground gas pockets. But one of them, an audio specialist named Lieutenant Mason Cole, began to suspect otherwise. On his first night shift, Mason noticed something strange. His equipment picked up rhythmic pulses echoing through the ground, steady, measured, and growing stronger each hour. When he logged the readings, his system auto-corrected every number to a single coordinate, 37° 14' north, 115.48 west, the exact center of the decommissioned silo. The next day, his commanding officer dismissed it as calibration error, but the pulse didn't stop. By the end of the week, every device within a mile radius began recording identical data. Something underground was synchronizing the signal, controlling the machines. Mason kept quiet until he saw the first light. It appeared just after midnight, a faint glow seeping from beneath the desert floor. Not fire, not electricity. It shimmered like heat mirage, yet cast shadows that bent the wrong way. He grabbed his camera, but the lens refused to focus. The light pulsed in rhythm with the hum. 3 beats. Silence. 3 beats again. Later, when Mason reviewed the footage, he froze. The light wasn't coming from the ground. It was forming shapes, circular, geometric, like the diagrams found in seismic mapping. But these weren't random. They were identical to the symbols carved into the original silo schematics, designs no engineer had ever explained. Something was copying the silo's layout from below. He sent the video to his supervisor. Within hours, his access badge was revoked and the footage deleted from the base servers. But someone had seen it, someone outside. 2 nights later, a black SUV stopped outside Mason's quarters. A woman stepped out, her face pale from the desert wind. She introduced herself quietly. "I'm Anna Cross." He thought she was dead. Everyone did. She didn't explain how she survived or where she'd been. Her voice was calm, but her eyes flickered with exhaustion, as if she hadn't slept in weeks. "It's still expanding," she said. "You've seen it, haven't you?" "The light." Mason nodded slowly. "What is it?" She hesitated. "It's not just under the desert anymore. The resonance is traveling through communication lines, through signals, through us." He frowned. "Through us?" She pulled a worn cassette from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. "This is the last thing my father recorded before he vanished. Listen carefully," the tape hissed to life. Static first, then a faint mechanical hum. Slowly a man's voice emerged, measured, urgent. The resonance is not random. It adapts, it learns. The frequencies. They rewrite perception. It's not sound anymore. It's awareness. Mason stopped the tape. "Awareness?" Anna leaned forward. "Every time we record it, every time we analyze it, it learns from us. That's how it spreads. It reflects whatever is listening." That night, they returned to the silo together. The air shimmered faintly, as though vibrating with invisible current. The hum pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat. Anna set up her handheld receiver and tuned it manually. For a moment, only static. Then a voice. "Anna." She froze. It wasn't her father's voice. It was hers, played back with perfect clarity, repeating her name in her own tone over and over. "Anna, Anna, Anna." She dropped the receiver, trembling. "It's using our voices now." Mason looked toward the silo's hatch. The metal surface glowed faintly red beneath the sand like a pulse under skin. Then, for a brief second, he saw movement behind it. A silhouette pressed against the other side of the steel, hands outlined by the glow. It was human-shaped, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, he blinked. The shape was gone. The hum stopped abruptly. The desert fell silent, utterly still. Then, without warning, every radio, every sensor, every flashlight within a mile radius turned on simultaneously, casting the sand in harsh white light, and from deep underground came a single, deafening sound, like metal tearing open, followed by what could only be described as a sigh. Anna shouted over the noise. "It's breaching! Mason, we have to go!" They ran for the vehicle. The sound grew louder, vibrating through their ribs. When they reached the ridge, Mason turned back. The desert floor was splitting open. The fissure they'd seen before now stretched across the horizon, glowing from within. Something was rising, but before they could see what it was, the light vanished. The hum collapsed into silence so complete it made their ears ache. The desert returned to darkness. In the aftermath, their instruments showed nothing unusual. No radiation, no heat, no sound. But Mason's watch had stopped, exactly at the moment the light disappeared. And when he looked at the recording from his body cam, the footage ended 23 seconds before the event. The final frame showed Anna staring toward the horizon, her face lit by blue light. She didn't remember any of it. Back at the temporary base, the entire operation was shut down overnight. Personnel were relocated, records scrubbed. Mason and Anna were ordered to leave Nevada immediately. But both knew the silence didn't mean safety. That night, in a diner outside Tonopah, they sat in silence, watching the static flicker on a broken TV. A local news broadcast cut in briefly before freezing mid-frame. Then, from the speakers came the hum, low, steady. "Familiar?" Anna gripped Mason's hand. "It's not underground anymore." He nodded slowly, the color draining from his face. "It's in the signal." The screen flickered once more, revealing a live aerial feed of the desert, heat-mapped, glowing faintly red where the silos once were. In the center, a single bright circle pulsed like a heartbeat. Anna whispered, "It's expanding." The broadcast cut to black, and in that silence, as the hum faded into the night, Mason noticed something impossible, the reflection in the window beside them. It wasn't theirs. It was standing just behind them, its outline flickering like static caught in human form. He turned sharply, but nothing was there, only the faint sound of breathing, close enough to fog the glass. And outside, across the endless Nevada sand, the hum began again, stronger, deeper, synchronized with the stars above, as though the entire desert was beginning to wake. The Echo Protocol. The desert didn't sleep anymore. Even when the wind fell still, there was always a faint vibration in the air, a rhythm that felt too deliberate to be natural. Mason hadn't closed his eyes in 30 hours. Every time he did, he could hear it again, the hum beneath the silence, the echo of something trying to remember him. Anna sat across from him in the motel room, her hands trembling as she rewound the tape recorder for the 4th time. "Listen to it again," she said, pressing play. The same distorted static. Then a low voice, his voice, whispering her name. Mason stared, hollow-eyed. "That's not possible." "I never said that." Anna didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the recorder's spinning reels. The voice spoke again, clearer this time. "Anna?" "Behind you." She turned sharply. Nothing. Just the worn wallpaper peeling at the corners. But Mason saw it, the faint indentation on the wall, as if someone invisible had leaned there seconds ago. Anna's voice wavered. "It's learning faster." They packed in silence and left before dawn, driving north along the empty highway. The horizon glowed faintly with a red hue, though the sun had not yet risen. Mason checked the compass. It spun aimlessly, the needle twitching as if magnetized by something unseen. Every radio tower they passed hummed faintly, their lights flickering in perfect rhythm with the pulse coming from the ground. Anna's phone buzzed, though there was no signal. One notification. Unknown number. A single message. Return to the origin. She looked at Mason. They want us back at Silo 19. He clenched the steering wheel. Or something pretending to. By the time they reached the outskirts of the restricted zone, the air had changed. A thin, metallic taste lingered on their tongues, and the static from their car's speakers grew louder, morphing into faint whispers that almost formed words. At the old checkpoint, the gates were gone, ripped from their hinges. The sand around them was glassed over, as though melted by heat. Mason crouched and touched the surface. It was cold. They moved on foot toward the old command building. Half buried in sand, its structure sagged, the windows opaque with dust. Inside, the smell of ozone clung to the air. Anna brushed away a layer of grime from a console. "The power grid's live," she whispered. "Something's rerouted it." The monitors flickered to life on their own. Dozens of feeds, thermal, night vision, seismic, all pointing toward a single massive heat source deep underground. Mason leaned closer. "It's building something down there." Before he could say more, a distorted face appeared on one of the monitors. His own. "Help me," it said, though his lips didn't move in sync. "It's not done yet." The image shattered into static. Anna stepped back, breath quickening. "Mason!" "It's mimicking consciousness." The floor trembled. From deep beneath the concrete, the hum surged, deeper, louder, resonant enough to rattle their bones. Lights flickered. The screens filled with new data, rows of symbols and waveforms, perfectly symmetrical. And then came a sound unlike any before, a heartbeat. Slow, powerful, metallic. Anna whispered, "It's alive!" A section of the floor split open, revealing a staircase descending into the dark. Without speaking, they followed. Each step echoed into an abyss that felt far larger than any man-made chamber. The deeper they went, the colder the air grew, until their breath fogged before them. At the bottom lay a vast circular room, walls lined with cables and pulsating conduits. In the center stood a massive column of light, suspended in mid-air, shifting between solid and vapor. The hum now formed words. "Welcome back," Anna flinched. "It knows me." Mason stared at the column. "You said your father built this." She nodded slowly. He thought he could harness resonance as energy, a new communication form that could transmit memory. But it didn't just store information. It absorbed it. The column pulsed brighter, casting their shadows across the walls. In the light, Mason saw outlines of people, dozens, maybe hundreds, frozen mid-motion, like ghosts burned into the air. Then he heard it again, his own voice coming from the light. "You left us!" Anna turned toward him. "That's not you." He stepped closer, the hum pulling at his mind. For a second, he saw himself reflected within the glow, but his reflection smiled when he didn't. The light flared. Every wall screen in the chamber activated at once, replaying moments from their lives, memories they hadn't spoken aloud. Anna's father standing before the same column. Mason's first day on site. Conversations they'd never recorded. "It's been listening since the beginning," Anna whispered. Every thought, every word. Mason's ears rang. The hum had become unbearable. "We have to shut it down," she hesitated. "If we cut the power, it might—" Before she could finish, the floor beneath the column cracked. A blinding surge of light erupted upward, throwing them to the ground. Through the glare, Mason saw something forming within the column, human-shaped, emerging slowly, built from the very resonance that had haunted them. When it spoke, the voice was layered, hundreds of tones woven into one. "You are not separate. You are the echo." Anna tried to stand, but the sound forced her back down. The light pressed outward, shaping itself into limbs, a face, a body that shimmered like liquid glass. And in that distorted reflection, Mason saw himself again, but older, hollow-eyed, staring back with quiet recognition. The figure stepped forward, its movements too precise to be human. "You created me," it said in his voice. "Now finish what you began." Anna pulled a small detonator from her jacket. "The only way to stop it is to collapse the chamber." Mason shook his head. "If we do, it'll scatter. Every signal, every network, it'll spread everywhere." She hesitated. "Then what do we do?" The figure reached out a hand. Listen, the hum stopped. The silence was perfect. And in that silence, Mason heard his own heartbeat, identical to the pulse that had been coming from the desert. He realized too late what it meant. The resonance wasn't beneath the ground anymore. It was inside them. The light dimmed suddenly. Anna stumbled, clutching her chest. Mason caught her as her pulse synchronized with the hum now rising again, faster, louder. The column began to spin violently, threads of light coiling upward like a storm. Anna's eyes flickered open, glowing faintly blue. Her voice was calm but wrong. It doesn't need the structure anymore. It has hosts. Mason backed away. Anna, fight it, she smiled faintly. You can't fight what's already part of you. The chamber's walls began to distort, bending as if the metal itself were breathing. Mason turned toward the staircase, but the exit had sealed. The hum rose into a deafening roar. He looked back one last time. The figure of light now stood behind Anna, its form merging with hers, their silhouettes blending until they were one. Mason, she said softly, run. The floor gave way, swallowing everything in a torrent of light. Then silence. When Mason opened his eyes, he was lying on the desert floor under the night sky. The facility was gone. No ruins, no sign of the silo. Just untouched sand stretching for miles. But the stars above pulsed faintly, in the same rhythm as the hum that once haunted the earth. And somewhere beyond the dunes, a familiar voice whispered through the wind, his own, calling his name.